My own grandson poured a glass of punch on me in front of our entire family. His supposed reason? I liked a photo of his ex-girlfriend on Facebook. Make sure you subscribe, because the real truth behind his cruel act was a manipulative game I was about to expose. My name is Eleanor. I'm 67, and my sincerest form of love has always been quiet attention. I may not understand the loud, chaotic world of my grandson, Leo, but I've learned to navigate its digital edges through my old tablet. I have a Facebook account. It's my small, sunlit window into the sprawling, busy lives of my family. It's where I see the vacation photos they forget to send me, the new job announcements, the little daily triumphs they're too busy to call and tell me about. My grandson, a 20-year-old university student with his grandfather's kind eyes and a rebellious streak all his own, is the main reason I log on every day. I still remember him as a little boy sitting in my kitchen, solemnly promising to build me a rocket ship to the moon. Now he's a man, and my likes on his posts are my quiet way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still proud. A few days ago, I was scrolling through my feed, past political rants from old high school friends and pictures of cats, when a post from his ex-girlfriend, Chloe, popped up. They had dated for 3 years, a serious, gentle first love. Chloe was a lovely girl, smart and warm, the kind of girl you hope your grandson brings home. I was genuinely sad when they broke up last spring. Her post was a picture of her on the college debate team, beaming as she held a first-place trophy. A wave of grandmotherly pride washed over me. This was a good kid, and she deserved to be celebrated. Without a second thought, I hit the like button and typed a quick comment. Congratulations, sweetie! I knew you could do it! XO Grandma E. A simple, harmless act of encouragement. Or so I believed. Today is Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday. My house, usually so quiet, is thrumming with life. The rich, savory scent of roasting turkey and sage stuffing fills the air, mingling with the sweet aroma of the pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. The television is on, some football game nobody is really watching. A familiar backdrop of cheers and whistles. When Leo arrived, my heart did its usual little flip of joy. But he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a young woman I'd never seen before, with startlingly platinum blonde hair and a smile that was surgically sweet. "Grandma, this is Madison," he said, his voice strangely flat. I extended my hand, my own smile warm and genuine. "It's so wonderful to meet you, Madison." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly cold for such a warm day, her painted nails digging slightly into my palm. Her eyes, a pale, chilly blue, scanned my face with an unnerving intensity. "You too, Eleanor. Leo has told me so much about his family." There was an edge to her voice, a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis on the word family that made it sound less like a compliment than a warning. Throughout the afternoon, the feeling of unease grew. Leo was a shadow of his usual self. He was distant, his answers to my questions monosyllabic. He was being carefully managed by Madison, who kept a proprietary hand on his arm, steering him away from conversations and shooting me cold little triumphant glances when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried to bring him a slice of his favorite pumpkin pie, the one I only make once a year. "I'm good, Grandma," he said, not even looking at me. before Madison pulled him into a conversation with his uncle. My own son, Leo's father, must have noticed my confusion. He came up behind me in the kitchen, clapping me gently on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it, Mom," he said with a sigh. "You know how they are at this age. New girlfriend. He's just trying to be cool. Just give them some space." I nodded, but his words didn't comfort me. I saw the coldness in my grandson's eyes, and I couldn't understand its source. I was still blissfully unaware that my innocent like on a social media post had been twisted into a declaration of war. I didn't yet know that it had started a chain reaction fueled by a poison I couldn't see, and that this festive, happy evening was destined to end for me in shocking, public humiliation. The rest of the afternoon was a masterclass in passive aggression, orchestrated by a 20-year-old girl I barely knew. Madison never left Leo's side. Her laughter a little too loud, her stories a little too long, creating an invisible force field around him. Every time I approached, she would steer him in another direction with a saccharine smile. It was subtle, masterful, and it was working. My own grandson was treating me like a stranger in my own home. Determined to make one last attempt to break through, I retreated to the kitchen. I decided to make my signature Thanksgiving punch, a festive mix of cranberry, orange, and sparkling cider that Leo had adored since he was a boy. It was our special tradition. He'd always help me stir it, his face lit with excitement. I poured a tall glass, the ice cubes clinking cheerfully, a sound of happier times. This, I thought, this will remind him. This is an offering of peace. I found them in the living room, sitting on the couch, surrounded by the rest of the family. I walked toward them, holding the glass out to Leo. "I made your favorite," I said, my voice warm. He looked at the glass, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the old Leo in his eyes. But then, Madison, who was nestled against his side, leaned in and whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the effect. The flicker of warmth in his eyes died, replaced by a flash of hot, defensive anger. He stood up abruptly, his movement so sharp it startled me. "I don't want it," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the low hum of conversation in the room. "Leo, honey, I just thought—" "You thought what?" he snapped, his voice rising. "You thought you could just pretend everything is fine after you publicly supported the girl who broke my heart? You're deliberately trying to disrespect my relationship with Madison." The room went silent. Everyone was staring. My son, Leo's father, started to rise from his chair, a look of concern on his face. "Leo, take it easy." But Leo was beyond reason. He was a puppet, and Madison was pulling the strings. He looked at me, his face a mask of fury, then at the glass of punch in my hand. "You want me to have this so badly?" he sneered. "Fine." He snatched the glass from my hand. I thought he was going to drink it. Instead, with a look of cold, deliberate malice, he turned the glass upside down and poured the entire contents of sticky, red, ice-cold punch all over my cream-colored silk blouse. A collective gasp went through the room. The punch dripped from my blouse onto the carpet, a dark, spreading stain. I stood there, frozen, dripping, the cold liquid seeping through to my skin. But the chill I felt was nothing compared to the ice in my heart as I looked at my grandson's face. There was no remorse, only a cold, hard triumph. Madison, behind him, had a look of feigned shock on her face, but I could see the victory glittering in her eyes. The cold, sticky punch soaked my blouse, but what chilled me to the bone was the look on my grandson's face. Everyone saw what happened, but in that first stunned moment, no one said a word. I thought this was the worst moment of my life, the absolute bottom of a pit of humiliation. I didn't know it was just the first shot in a campaign orchestrated by that girl to paint me as the villain in my own family's story. I don't remember driving home. I remember the feeling of the sticky, cold punch seeping into my skin and the even colder silence of my family. No one rushed to help me. No one screamed at Leo for what he'd done. They were just shocked, awkward glances. My own son, Leo's father, eventually broke the silence with a weak, "For heaven's sake, Leo, what's gotten into you?" It wasn't a defense of me. It was an expression of social embarrassment. I mumbled a quiet apology for the mess and fled, the weight of their collective gaze feeling like a physical burden on my shoulders. I spent the next day in a state of deep, wounded shock, replaying the scene in my mind. The cruelty of it was one thing, but the silence of my family was another, a deeper, more insidious wound. On the second day, my son called. I answered, a foolish flicker of hope in my heart that he was calling to offer comfort, to tell me he had disciplined his own child. "Mom," he began, and his voice was strained, tired. "I talked to Leo and to Madison." "And?" I asked, my voice small. He sighed, a long, weary sound I knew too well. It was the sound of a man who hated confrontation and would do anything to avoid it. "Well, according to Madison, you've been a little cold to her since she arrived, making little comments, comparing her to Chloe. She says she's been feeling very unwelcome, and Leo felt caught in the middle. He knows he overreacted, of course, but he's under a lot of pressure. He says he just snapped." I was speechless. A cold, creeping horror washed over me as I listened to this carefully constructed fiction. Little comments? Coldness? I had barely spoken to the girl. I was being painted not as the victim of an unprovoked attack, but as a passive-aggressive instigator, a jealous, petty old woman. That's not true," I whispered, my throat tight. "Look, Mom, I know you probably didn't mean anything by it," he continued, completely ignoring my denial. His tone was placating, as if speaking to a difficult child. "But feelings are feelings, and right now things are very tense. Madison is very upset, and for Leo's sake, we need to smooth things over." There it was, the true purpose of his call. Not my well-being, but the restoration of a fragile, false peace. "What are you suggesting, Michael?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He cleared his throat. "I was just thinking, maybe it would be best if you just gave Madison a call just to apologize. Clear the air for Leo. It would mean a lot to him." The request was so outrageously unjust, so profoundly twisted, that it broke through my shock and ignited a fire in my soul. I, the one who was publicly humiliated, who was left standing in a puddle of sticky punch and shattered dignity, was being asked to apologize to the very person who had orchestrated the entire event. I was no longer just the victim of my grandson's temper. I was being actively gaslight by my own son. "Apologize?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I'd rather drink a gallon of bleach." And I hung up the phone. The fire that had been ignited in my soul was now a cold, controlled rage. They had called me old. They had called me cold. They had called me the problem. Fine. If I was going to be the villain in their story, I might as well find out who wrote the script. My grief for my broken relationship with Leo was still there, a heavy ache in my chest. But now it was joined by a new, sharp-edged determination. I would not be erased. I would not be gaslit into oblivion. I had to understand who this girl, this Madison, truly was. So I returned to the place where it all began, Facebook. But this time, I wasn't there to leave cheerful comments. I was there as a detective. I put on my strongest reading glasses, poured a cup of black coffee, and began to dig. I started with Madison's profile. It was a curated masterpiece of perfection. Smiling photos, inspirational quotes, posts about charity fun runs. But a person's real story is never in what they post. It's in their digital footprints they leave behind. I went back years. I looked at photos she was tagged in, at the comment sections of old posts. I looked at the profiles of her friends and their friends. It was a painstaking, tedious process. For hours, I found nothing but the polished veneer of a popular young woman. But then I found a crack. A comment on a photo from 3 years ago from a girl who was no longer on her friends list. "Careful, everyone," the comment read. "She's not who she seems." It was the thread I needed. I found that girl's profile and sent her a polite, carefully worded message, introducing myself as Leo's grandmother and expressing a vague sense of concern. And then I kept digging. My search led me from Facebook to an old, abandoned blogging platform. And there it was, a blog, started by Madison 5 years ago. Most of it was typical teenage angst, but one post, hidden under a cryptic title, was a digital smoking gun. The post was titled "The Art of the Reset." In it, she had written a chilling step-by-step guide on how to take control of a new relationship. I read the words, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. Rule number 1 is to isolate him from his past. The ex-girlfriend is the primary target. Make him believe she's a threat. Rule number 2, the family. A doting mother or grandmother is your biggest obstacle. You must make them the villain so you can become his savior. Create friction. Twist their words. Make their love look like control. A boy will always choose a new love over an old one if you frame it as his own heroic decision. I printed out the entire post. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just a difficult girlfriend. This was a calculated, predatory campaign. She hadn't just reacted to my like. She had been waiting for an excuse to use it. They called me an old woman who didn't understand social media, who was out of touch with the modern world. They had no idea that I would find the evidence of their lies in that very world. I was holding her own words, her manipulator's handbook in my hands. All that was left was to find a way to get my grandson to read it, to show him what kind of beautifully constructed trap he had fallen into. I sat at my kitchen table, the printed pages of Madison's blog spread before me like a declaration of war. I had the truth, cold and ugly, in my hands. But what good was it? I knew, with the weary certainty of a mother, that a direct confrontation would be a disaster. If I showed this to Leo, he would see it not as evidence, but as an attack. He would defend her, and a wall between us would become impenetrable. If I showed it to my son, he would call it internet nonsense and accuse me of escalating the trauma. I was holding a weapon I couldn't use. I felt a wave of despair. Was this it? Was I doomed to watch my grandson be consumed by this girl's poison, alienated from everyone who truly loved him? I looked at the blog post again, at the cruel, calculated words. The ex-girlfriend is the primary target. And then an idea, wild and desperate, sparked in my mind. If Madison had made Chloe the target, then perhaps Chloe could now become my ally. It was a terrifying thought. Reaching out to a young woman whose heart my grandson had broken felt like a massive overstep. But I was out of options. With trembling fingers, I found Chloe's profile again. I spent an hour composing a short, honest message, deleting and rewriting every word. Finally, I sent it. Dear Chloe, I don't know you well, but I am Leo's grandmother, Eleanor. I am writing to you because I am deeply worried about him. I believe he is in a very manipulative relationship, and I have no one else to turn to. Would you be willing to speak with me? I would be forever grateful. I didn't expect a reply, but it came less than an hour later. I'd be happy to talk, Mrs. Eleanor. We spoke on the phone the next day. Her voice was hesitant at first, but as I explained what had happened, the punch, the gaslighting, the blog post, her hesitation turned into a sad, knowing anger. That's her playbook. She did the same thing to me and Leo. She twisted my words, made him think my friends were a threat. She was the reason we broke up. He just couldn't see it. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She still had the proof. Before she had blocked Madison on everything, she had taken screenshots of the relentless, manipulative text messages Madison had sent to Leo about her. Vicious, calculated lies. She sent them to my email. As I looked at them on my tablet, at the cruel words typed out in black and white, I knew I had everything I needed. My plan was simple, and it was a gamble. I printed out everything, Madison's blog post, the screenshots from Chloe. I placed them in a large manila envelope. On top, I put a handwritten letter. It was the hardest letter I've ever written. There was no accusations, no "I told you so's." It was just a letter of pure, unconditional love. My dearest Leo, this is not meant to hurt you. It is meant to help you see. Your heart is too good and too kind to be a pawn in someone else's cruel game. No matter what, I will always, always love you. Grandma Ellie. The next day, knowing he was in class, I drove to his apartment and slipped the envelope under his door. The evidence was now out of my hands. My move was made. All I could do now was wait and pray. With no way of knowing if my grandson would even open the letter or if he would throw it in the trash and choose to remain in the beautifully constructed prison his new love had built for him. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat. Every car that slowed on my street sent a jolt of anxious hope through me. But the phone remained silent. The days stretched into an agonizing quiet, and with each passing hour, my hope began to curdle into a familiar, heavy grief. I had played my last card, and I had lost. He had chosen her. He had chosen the lie. On the 7th evening, I was sitting in my living room, the house dark except for the soft glow of a single lamp, when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I didn't move. I couldn't bear another disappointment. Then came a soft, hesitant knock on the front door. My heart pounding, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Leo. He was alone, standing on my porch, his shoulders slumped. He looked broken. All the anger and arrogance from Thanksgiving were gone, replaced with a profound, hollow sadness. In his hand, he was clutching the manila envelope I had left for him. I opened the door. We just stood there for a long moment, the cool night air between us, filled with all the things we hadn't said. "Grandma," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. He couldn't seem to meet my eyes. I read it. All of it. I talked to Chloe. She showed me more. I was so blind. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were filled with a shame so deep it broke my heart all over again. "I'm so, so sorry," he said, tears finally streaming down his face. "What I did to you, it was monstrous. There's no excuse. She twisted everything, and I let her. I'm so, so sorry." I didn't need to hear any more. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything at all. I just opened my arms, and he collapsed into them, sobbing like the little boy I remembered, the one who used to run to me with a scraped knee. I held him, stroking his hair, my own tears silently soaking into his shoulder. In that moment, there was no anger. There was only the powerful, unconditional love that is a grandmother's greatest strength and greatest weakness. After a long time, we went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had planned my desperate campaign. He told me he had broken up with Madison. He said the moment he saw her lies in her own words, the spell was broken, and he was horrified by the person he had become under her influence. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while. Then he looked around the familiar, warm kitchen, his gaze finally resting on the crystal punch bowl I kept on the top shelf. "Grandma?" he asked, his voice still thick with emotion. Do you think you could teach me how to make your punch the right way? I want to remember it the right way." I looked at my grandson, at the man he was becoming, a man who had the courage to face his own terrible mistake and the humility to ask for forgiveness. And I smiled, a real, genuine smile, for a long, long time. "Of course, honey," I said, getting up to pull the bowl down from the shelf. "I'd love that."